The ultimate goals are I have better feature alignment with my software, and I can hopefully deliver a better support experience to my customer.
Hi, I'm Russ, and this is the Memory Makers Podcast, the show that helps you create amazing customer experiences and make more memories. I'm trying to think of a fun jingle for what we have for today. So for those of you that know the money, we're going to do Memory Makers Podcast, because joining me today is Miss Leslie, Miss or Mrs. Is it? How dare I?
It's Mrs. So it's okay.
Leslie Legel, joining us from CenterEdge, Director of Payments. So I'm excited to learn what that title all encompasses with the fun stuff that you do at CenterEdge. But welcome, Leslie. How are you?
I am great. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Absolutely. I'm excited to jump in. For those of you who have not had the pleasure of meeting Leslie, would you mind just giving us a little bit of a background of how did you get into the industry and a little bit of that 30-second overview for us?
Absolutely. I'd say it was probably a little bit of dumb luck, as it is with, the start of anyone's career. But I had the pleasure of beginning my financial services journey back many moons ago with Fifth Third Bank. And then that transitioned into working with their credit card processing company, which really, I was surprised. I found to be quite interesting and became very passionate about the whole industry. And really from there, have just had the opportunity to work with different acquiring partners, but through that created relationships with our software vendors. And that transition really brought me into my role now at CenterEdge, working on the software side of things, but managing the payments and financial service side of things for CenterEdge. So it's been a ride. I've learned a lot, and being in family entertainment software is definitely a very fun and exciting place to be. Considering that I'm still on the payment side of things, it's nice to have that as part of it too.
I bet you get the cool credit points when you go to the financial conferences, and they're like, "What are you doing? What are you doing?" And it's like, "Oh, hold my beer. Here we go."
Exactly right. Now I'm in like, oh, you get to go see these really cool customers who have like arcades and roller coasters and all these really fun things, and I'm like the payments person, and they're like, "That was lucky for sure."
Yeah. Well, you're the bad girl of payments. I love it when you go to those conferences. It's fun to be the black sheep sometimes with that. Well, speaking of, and with your background and looking at blending software and payments, for those folks that are new to the industry or getting their start and trying to kind of find their way and getting their plan together, this area of focus is probably one of the most recognized critical elements to the business when you're first starting out, because it's the lifeblood, it's the transactions, the flow, everything, but of how people are going to pay and process payments at your facility. But it's typically something that folks are usually late to the game in getting on board with that as they're putting over their plan, right? They want to get caught up in the walls and the where the physical layout and what attractions are going in there. But CenterEdge, you guys have such a critical infrastructure piece for what so many folks are looking at. And for the cats that have been in the industry for a while, that credit card processing fees, that whole landscape just gets hinky, and it's really hard to feel like you've got a focused path forward with a proper Sherpa. And it's why we love you guys so much, because not only that, and I'll redirect it at the end here, but the amount of resources and content that you guys put out as a team is just absolutely exquisite. I find myself constantly referencing it, even of just, hey, you should look at this article, you should do that. Like, you guys put out amazing content that doesn't just focus on your guys' area of expertise, but really helps across the industry. So today should be really, really good, and diving into some of the as we were talking about this, and what we wanted it to focus on is Credit Card Reader's Digest, unblurring the lines for operators. So let's jump right in. As we were talking about the complexity of credit card processing, Why is credit card processing confusing and expensive? And how can we start to uncover some of the layers and regulations and nuances that start to go with this whole thing?
It's a great question, Russ, and thank you for all of the compliments on the content, because that is such a huge part of our goal in delivering how we have this conversation today, because you're exactly right. When you think about the merchant services landscape, it is so many layers deep, so many people involved, and that creates all of this complexity around such a vital component of our customers' businesses. And so I think, when I think about it, there's so many different layers, whether it's the card brands, it's the networks, it's the acquirers in the background, and then also the fact that there's so many different people that want to provide merchant services to our customers that it's overwhelming to deal with. So to be able to break that down is just, how do I understand what I'm paying, who am I paying it to, and how can I simplify that so it's not an overwhelming cost that I continually have to deal with. I compare it oftentimes to the insurance industry, and it's one of those things where if you're not constantly watching it as a business owner, your rates just continue to go up year after year.
Yeah.
And so it's really hard for a business owner, when it is such a complex landscape, to be able to navigate how they manage that continual kind of cost increase that they see over time.
Mm-hmm. Well, what we've found, and to your point exactly, that insurance comparison is great. Like if you're not looking at this and evaluating it and seeing, it's like whether it's terms of service changes or new service fees that are there, all of that stuff, it's like it's really easy for that stuff to all kind of get lost in the sauce. And if you're not asking questions or learning that avenue, or you don't have someone on your team that has had experience doing some of that before, it can be really daunting to try to even understand, like, what am I actually paying for? Like this reads like it's they're handling this portion, but no, I need another, kind of piece to actually navigate and do that. How do you guys, will you help customers actually look through and say, hey, this is what you should be looking for. These are things to watch out for, if and even helping like with some audits and things. How do you help folks wrangle that a little bit?
Absolutely. So I think one thing to always keep in mind, and I try and simplify this, is there's really three main components that make up costs when it comes to credit card processing. You have cost associated to the card brands. So when I speak of the card brands, Visa, MasterCard, American Express, Discover, the brands that we all know and carry around in our wallet.
Right.
And so they're going to want a piece of this pie. But then there's, the actual acquiring platforms that are making sure that money can move through that full transaction process. And you better believe they're getting their piece of their pie too.
Sure. Yeah.
But then there's, the third party merchant service provider, who's the one that our merchant may actually interact with and sign their contract with. So you make a great point, like what are the terms of, my agreement? How long is this for? All of those things. And they're getting a piece of it too.
Mm-hmm.
So when I try and break it down from that perspective, there's a couple non-negotiables. The card brands and the issuers of those cards are always going to get their piece. There's things that we can do to help make those more affordable in terms of what I call interchange management. But then there's also, the piece when it comes to what provider are you using and what are they charging you for their services? And that's really where I like to sit down with customers and say, okay, let's look at your current statement and look at the makeup of what these costs are. And are you paying what you should in each one of those buckets? And that's absolutely something that I've been doing for years for customers to help them understand and see where they can, improve, whether that be maybe they need to renegotiate with their current provider, work with someone different, or are there operational processes that we can improve to help them reduce their overall interchange costs because, they're using out-of-date technology.
Right.
They're not up to the most, PCI compliance standards and those types of things that we can suggest for them too.
Oh, that's rad. Yeah, and it's also one of those that let's say you start out, right, and then you're growing, you're adding more locations. I mean, there are some operators that have, gone to extreme measures of like, well, my rates are this and no one can touch it because I'm housing all of this. I bought all the tech stack and everything else, and like they've turned themselves into a blurred line between an end user and an actual hub in that process to be able to do it. And so it's something that as you're growing and evolving the business too, there are more things that you can take advantage of. The landscape changes to stay current on that. When shifting gears a little bit, so one of the things, obviously, then, the next step is not just helping to understand the credit card processing, but now, to your point, are there opportunities where we can have better integrations and process improvements on the software side to open up some of those cost efficiencies, or make sure that we're paying for what we actually need and what's moving the needle appropriately for it? Why are software providers integrating credit card processing and those benefits and pitfalls? Like, what do we have to be aware of on the integration side?
So it's a great question, and it's such a hot topic. And like I mentioned before, I kind of landed in ISVs in FEC. I was working with other ISVs in healthcare, restaurants, like other verticals as well. And
Sure.
we have seen this shift of where all of these software providers are like, okay, I need to kind of jump in and get a piece of this pie too. And the reason that they do that is because if they're providing merchant services, the ultimate goals are, I have better feature alignment with my software, and I can hopefully deliver a better support experience to my customer, and maybe make that journey less of a friction point.
Mm.
Of course, there's revenue that comes from that too, and that makes sense. Because you're creating this stronger relationship with your end user, and you're, trying to, again, tie your feature set to not have to work with all of these different providers.
Mm.
That is a great thing when it's done well.
Yeah.
But, we talk about this.
Right.
And it's very challenging if you don't have some of this, the in-house experts and around the processing industry, and to be able to really navigate through that with your development teams, your support teams, and all of those different things. So the goal in doing it, is very well thought, right? If you want to create this best in class experience and for your customers, and that's great. But do you have the resources internally or at your fingertips to be able to make sure that you're doing it the right way?
The right way. Yeah. Yeah. Well, and it's interesting too, because one of the biggest things that we see, whether it's at events like 360 or at the trade shows, we were just talking about, we're 6 weeks ahead of IAPA as we're recording this episode, but like, just being able to have a starting point where I don't have to go through the expensive learning curve of the DIY route, and I'm making sure that I'm either not overpaying on the front end, or I've got some future vision and road mapping of where I'm going to also need to go. And I have people who also have a plethora of clients and case studies and examples of, well, based on your situation here, you would fall more into this category where it makes more sense. Like, it's one of those, like, you have incredible partners in this industry, and this is one where you've got to make sure, you have a healthy ongoing relationship and regular discussion, because that stuff can transform quickly. And even if it's stuff like, hey, I need to have a better understanding of what the Credit Card Competition Act is going to do for us or not, like stuff like that, where they may have I saw a thing on, a quick 30-second hit on the news about it, and I sort of think I understand it, but like, what does that actually look like for us if that goes through? What is that, all of that kind of stuff. And so it's just such a vital way to make sure, because this is such a mission critical piece of the business, in order to make sure that things are going smoothly and that you're not paying a dumb tax, as Keith Cunningham would say. So, the next thing I wanted to chat with you on was this navigating of credit card fees and surcharge considerations.
Oh, sure.
Which, like, holy moly, this is just one of those big ticket items, that goes into that. why are there reasons behind the surcharging credit card payments, and how does that, what does that real world translation look like for the operators?
So it's really interesting. And this is, to your point, like this is all the rage right now in credit card processing. What is the right thing for me to do as an operator? Do I implement a surcharge program? Do I not? Like, what is that going to translate to my guests? And how does that, how does that change the landscape of my business? But the interesting thing about the surcharge conversation is this is not a new conversation. Visa and MasterCard have been talking about this for years, right? I mean, it's been, I think like 2010 was when originally like they were starting to like really enable the opportunity for merchants to be able to charge a surcharge. But the reality was that just adoption was so low because technology on the acquiring side and on the software side has to support that initiative. So as we've seen kind of the landscape change over time, and, I think COVID really probably contributed to this quite a bit because of just inflation and all the other things that have come out of that, like it is really hitting home with merchants now to say, okay, do I do this surcharge program? Do I do a dual pricing program? What does that mean to me? So two very different things, right? Credit card surcharging is a very strict guideline regulation set by Visa, MasterCard, Discover, and American Express. You are adding on a fee for someone to pay with a credit card. So, that cannot feel great for some merchants to want to offer that to their guests. But at the same time, it still gives them the ability to potentially save in some areas when it comes to credit specifically, because again, that's the credit only program versus like you also now have these dual pricing programs where you can have a standard price offered, but then a potential discount for your customers that want to pay you in cash or with a gift card, whatever the case may be. And so, that program is not as it's not regulated per se by the card brands in as many ways. It's just you want to make sure that your approach and the way that you're offering that program makes sense for your guests and how you deliver it. And again, really giving that choice between, hey, here's my standard price, here's my cash price that you have the choice to choose from. And the important part of that is making sure that there's transparency in that message and having your technology align to be able to deliver that experience.
What's interesting too, and this is, as I joking with Danny, this is anecdotal bro science. So, this is not vetted statistics, but just from my own personal experience when we've gone through this, because a number of like the small mom and pop restaurants and everything that are around us now, they're like, hey, are you going to pay with a credit card? Okay, that's this price. If you're going to pay with this. So they're all really trying to set those healthy expectations as you're going through it. And it's so funny because even when my wife and I are talking about it and she's like, what on earth, blah, 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 pay with cash. We're not doing that. And it's like, oh, sure, that's fine. But I also have less emotional conflict about doing that with a smaller entity, just because it's like, hey, you're mom and pop, like your small business, like, I'm not worried about that as much. And I'm okay with it because I understand. But then you've got some of the larger entities where I don't know whether or not I'm paying more for that, where it's not as communicated as clearly sometimes. And that may be by design where it's, hey, we're in a good enough market. We're not, as overly concerned with it. It's not going to jeopardize people's decision-making with spending money with us with this small amount that goes on it. And they prefer the convenience of being able to just do, cashless, whatever. But it does have real world implications because you have some operators that's like, we are trying to be as cashless as possible. But we also don't want to alienate a customer from, we want them to have autonomy in how they spend their money that way too.
No, it's a great point. And I see this all the time. Like, obviously my brain is wired to look for it, just being in the business that I am and seeing how different operators within our industry and outside of our industry end up disclosing this information. And to your point, some are very clear and they want you to know, like, hey, look, I want you to have a choice, but, and I respect that and understand like these businesses have to make this decision because it financially impacts them substantially.
Yeah.
And they want to continue to run and operate their business. And then you have, these other companies where you may go in there and I'm horrible. I don't ask for a receipt. I might, because I'm just going to put it in the side pocket of my car.
Yeah.
Literally that girl on Instagram that, they always show the wife that puts her receipt in that thing.
Yeah.
And so, I'm like, don't give me the receipt because that's where it's just going to end up in my car.
Right. Yeah.
But I'm probably getting, the fee passed on to me and I just don't realize it. But by nature, I'm using my credit card for other reasons too. I want my rewards points.
Yep.
I want, so I'm not going to probably change my buying behavior because of something like that.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? Like, I mean, and I poke fun at my wife. I mean, she complains when the price of stamps go up, and I'm like, how many stamps are you really using? And you buy forever stamps in bulk. Like, what are we even talking about? But like for her, it is a sticking point. She also hates to pay for shipping like that, and she will add to cart to make sure she gets that free shipping. And so it's again, very much an important part of her purchasing part of the process, where I have a much, to your point, more laissez-faire, like I'm hitting that thing, I'm not checking the receipt, I'm an identity theft's dream, because it's like, oh shit, we need to, we need to look at some of that. So, but it's so that's the other thing too, that I think is important for operators. It's like, you ultimately need to make the best decision for you, because there are going to be plenty of folks on either end of this spectrum. But what I've at least seen is that the majority of younger spenders and things are not going to be, making a mountain out of the molehill aspect of this. But it just comes to then, like you said, if you are going to do it, and, make sure that your team's well versed on how to be able to explain it and communicate it. If you do have a person, because it's typically one of those, like, people rarely have a mild reaction these days to something. They're either like totally fine with it, or how on earth is this a thing? And, it's easy then in that vacuum for them to start looking at the business operator and saying like, what are you guys doing? And it's like, no. This is everywhere and everyone kind of a thing.
And Russ, that's where the education is so important, and what you provide to these operators, and making sure that they have a clear path to doing this the right way. And then, having training for them and their teams to say, okay, this is why we're doing it, and this is how it's going to look. And, so if they have that person who, to your point, may react strongly. But, what's interesting is, we've been doing this for a while now, and we don't see that it increases cash flow at businesses. And there's, hardly, if any, pushback by guests, because we're conditioned as consumers to pay things like convenience fees and some of these other things when we use Uber Eats and, gas stations conditioned us to it too, right? Like, do you want the easy pay or do you want this pay?
Right.
So that, and I think to your point about younger consumers, like they're definitely conditioned to that, right?
Very
because
much
it's
so.
Everywhere now.
Yeah, convenience fee and access over, ownership and cost savings is really where we started to see this, kind of split, where you've got some of the millennials that are kind of in that in-between transition era kind of a piece. But like it's not even by demographic, like overall as a whole, the younger group, it's like, they're used to Uber Eats, they're used to Uber and Airbnb and those kinds of things. And so it's like so many more of their everyday purchases have started to have this. And it's much more about just the access and like, nope, I want to get into the fun. And so it's then just understanding, hey, if we're serving, a different demographic or a different age group or things like that, like, do they tend to have some stronger feelings in one direction or another? But overall, the majority of what we're seeing is that it's not getting a huge pushback, because it's just kind of the landscape as a whole of what people are seeing, and they are seeing it across the board if they are paying attention to it.
That's right. I mean, I think, I have 2 young kids. So when I get into the family entertainment center, it is like, get me to that bowling lane, get them skating, get them in the arcade as fast as possible. I'm just like, okay, here we go. Let's play. And this is not part of that is not part of my decision-making process. It's, I just want to get started and let them have their fun, and, let's all have a good time. Right.
Yeah. That's why more people also need to be making it easier to buy those tickets and packages and things on your website before they even get in there. So that way they're ready to rock and roll. Like, it's those friction points that you're starting to remove that are getting weighted a lot more heavily. around the customer satisfaction piece, right? Where it's like, I just want to be able to walk in. I want it to feel like this is my place and my home and all of that. Like, I want to get into the fun as fast as possible.
Exactly.
Well, I love it. Before we wrap up, a couple of things that I wanted to touch on was any greatest lesson learned, either personally or professionally, or an awesome book or podcast or quote that you've come across recently or that has served well that you'd love to share?
Well, I think the greatest lesson for me is to know that I can learn from anyone that I have the ability to encounter with. So whether it be that I'm learning something good or bad, I had a boss, probably 15 years ago now, tell me, you may learn things from me that you like, and you may learn things from me that you don't like, and that's okay. And I have just kept that in my heart and head, like with every interaction. And I see it, and I try and instill that in my kids too, right? As they're like navigating, like making friends. It's just like, you may learn some great things from this person, but then there's other things that you may say, you know what? I don't think those are things that I'm going to take on with me in life too. So I just kind of try and be always learning from that perspective. And, that's something that's been really important to me.
I love it. Well, it's so much about, to your point, it sets a good tone of not everything that's going to come my way is going to be sunshine and daisies. And so knowing that, I can also be a little bit more, prepared for when those moments come up, instead of that just coming completely as much out of left field. There's still plenty of things that can, but I love that mindset. That's fantastic. One last thing that I wanted to make sure to plug for everyone, and we talked about it at the top of the episode, but if you don't have CenterEdge's resource page favorited in your bookmarks bar, you need to be doing that, because the amount of articles, blogs, resources, there's guides and checklists and white papers, like it is a treasure trove of resources for you to be able to start looking at, hey, if I want to just start peeling back some layers of the onion of this, and it's not just around CenterEdge only content, it's things like, how you should go about preparing for IAPA if you're an operator, and prioritizing what you want to get out of those kinds of things. Like, it is a slew of wonderful content and we'll put the link in the description and everything, so that way you guys can jump to that. But that needs to be one of your go-to resources moving forward as well. Additionally, we'll also have a link for the CenterEdge Amusement 360 registration code, so that way you guys can use that, because as Leslie and I are talking here, we are big on education and empowering people through information, and that rising tide raises all boats. So we appreciate you guys so much for being a fantastic partner and sponsor, and a shout out to Johnny Dogs, who is afraid of public speaking, but gets up on that stage on the panel discussions and just brings great insight and knowledge. And so we really appreciate you guys so much for all that you do for the industry as a whole. So with that, we're at a good place to wrap up. I want to thank you so much, Leslie, for joining us here today, and really enjoyed the conversation and kind of diving into this. We've got more awesome content coming your guys' way through the weekly episodes. As you've seen, we're doing rotations between partners and operators and some entrepreneurial focus, so we're really loving what's coming down the pike. If you liked what you heard today, be sure to give us those 5 stars, please, and thank you. We always appreciate that. And thank you again for joining us. Big shout out to Mikey Mike on the 1s and 2s who worked in that Ultranet, and we will see you on the next one, Troublemakers.
Thank you all.